Dame Joan Sutherland was the most acclaimed soprano of the 20th century, and this week she died in Switzerland, aged 83. Hi, I'm Monica Attard, and today, Sunday Profiles tribute to the great Dame. Well, in 2005, when she was 78, I interviewed Dame Joan Sutherland for this program. And back then she thought age had taken its toll. Her voice was not what it had been, or what the New York Times this week described it as, at its best, and I quote, evenly produced throughout an enormous range. She could spin lyrical phrases with elegant legato, subtle colourings and expressive nuances. Dame Joan Sutherland, who called London's Covent Garden her spiritual home, was a major force in bel canto opera, and her death has left the opera world saddened in the extreme. In this interview, we start in her childhood in Sydney. Did she always dream of singing?
Well, I did actually. It was a sort of a hopeless dream, but I was a mad lover of the voice of Kirsten Flagstad and many others, and Gully Kutchi as well. But I just always sang. I don't remember when I didn't sing. So I had a voice of some kind, and I used to use it singing around the garden and the house.
So what motivated you to sing? Was it just something that just came naturally to you? You just felt a need to sing and you used to sing?
Well, there was always music in the house. My mother had a mezzo-soprano voice, and she used to practice every day, although she didn't sing professionally, but she used to help out some of her friends with some of the sort of societies that did music halls on afternoon teas and so on. And it was a beautiful mezzo-soprano voice, and she had been very well trained by, I think, who was the greatest teacher in Australia at that time. He was a pupil of Mathilde Marchesi. His name was Burns Walker, and there were many other fine voices came out of his studio. He wanted her to go abroad, and she said, no, I'd rather go and watch the cricket with my friends.
And of course she had a family.
She married a very nice widower with a ready-made family, and then she had two daughters with, again, to add to the four that were already in the family. So it was a happy household, and there was music of all kinds, and I sort of went for the opera.
And the household was in Sydney?
Yes, it was at the time. The time I'm speaking, it was at Point Piper. My father died, and we moved. My mother and my sister and myself moved back to the old house in Wallara, which had been her home.
And where did you go to school, Dame Joan?
I went to school at the Church of England school in Waverley, St Catherine's. It was the oldest girls' school in Australia, they say.
So when did you begin to study opera? When did that aspect of your life
Well, I didn't really start to study seriously until I was 18.
For any particular reason?
I was at school, and I then went to secretarial college and was holding down a secretarial job. And I won a small scholarship and started studying, and that was it. I went on from there. I won a few competitions in Australia, and with the money and what I'd earned as a secretary, I decided I'd better go off and see if I could do any better overseas. So
where did you work as a secretary?
Oh, first of all, I think with the radiophysics laboratory at the university. That was during the war still. And then I was a secretary to a firm of farm suppliers. They sold everything from wine to combine harvesters.
I bet they can't believe that their Joan became Dame Joan Sutherland.
Well, they can't, but I occasionally get a little card from one or two of them.
Oh, how delightful.
Yes.
Dame Joan, now let's move on to your operatic career, because very early on in your career you were dubbed La Stupenda, and you became arguably the finest bel canto specialist in modern opera. Can you describe that journey to us?
Oh dear, that would take a long time. Dear, it was like 42 years or something. Never mind.
Well, what influenced you? I mean, did your husband influence your choice of bel canto?
Oh, very much. No, it was definitely a twosome. He was of great importance to my career. He understood the repertoire very much. In fact, I think more than anybody who was around at that time, and he sort of found arias and songs that I could sing to advantage, and especially when we started recording many things that had come out of his hidey-hole cupboards. He was a great collector, and he always collected sort of music that interested him as possible use for me, and it sort of paid off.
Now, bel canto means quite literally beautiful singing, you know, and the
Yes,
secret...
we don't get too much of it today, do you believe me?
Really? We'll get onto that in a moment. But first, can I just ask you, the secret I read to mastering it is passing from one musical phrase to the next without interruption. Now, I assume that you weren't initially trained in the style, so how did you learn it?
Well, I think my mother was trained in that style, and I copied what she did from the age of, well, as far as I can remember, from the age of 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
I probably was copying her before that, but I don't remember. I used to sit down at her feet while she did her scales and exercises or sang a few songs. She used to do some vocal work every day, and of course I was at home, I wasn't at school by then, and sort of enjoyed copying her, and she used to correct me, but she says she didn't teach me, but she laid a foundation, and what she did lay was a long legato line through the middle of the voice. The middle of the voice is the anchor of the whole range of the voice, and if you have a firm middle, a beautiful middle, you have to sing with the rest of the voice, the lower register and the upper register, with one line. You join those three registers together and you get a long vocal line. And that is the basis, actually, of all singing, never mind just bel canto, that you must have a proper, you must learn to breathe properly, which she actually taught me, basically. And you must learn to breathe, support and project the sound. And the sound must be beautiful, always, soft or loud, and you have to have an even line through the whole of the range.
And so did your husband have a role in changing your voice in any way?
Oh, definitely, definitely, because I was all geared to be a so-called dramatic soprano, and I was singing much heavier arias and thinking about much heavier roles than I actually ended up singing. And he said, I don't understand you. He said, you sing all these heavy arias and that you're being guided into the heavier repertoire, but he said, you've got a real top. He said, when you're singing around the house, you go up to the top of the voice without any problem. And yet if you try and sing a high C in one of these heavy arias, it's a bit of a difficulty for you to get there. So we worked on that, and it didn't take too long for me to realise that he was absolutely right.
So, Dame Joan, what opera do you enjoy singing in most?
Oh, I loved Norma. I think that was, for me, the high point of my whole repertoire.
Why?
Basically, the music is so wonderful, and the music of the other singers is also fantastic. And Norma is a real woman. It's all fraught with high-flown drama, and it does nothing but ascend in drama and musical ecstasy, I might say. Another favourite was Esclarmonde, which was by Massenet, and Esclarmonde, again, is a fantastic opera, and I think has been on the shelf for years.
And what's your favourite language for opera?
Well, of course, Italian and French. Italian first and then French. German becomes too guttural, too many consonants, as with English. But the French and Italian flow so beautifully.
Now, Pavarotti maintains that you taught him. Is that true?
Rubbish. He was interested to see how I breathed, and he studied that a bit, but during rehearsals.
Right. How did you two meet?
Well, Richard actually heard him do an audition with our agent at one stage, and a few months later, a tenor defaulted in Miami, I guess it was, and he immediately thought that the director of the theatre said, "Who am I going to get?" And he said, "Oh, I heard a fine young Italian tenor who's just beginning to sing publicly," and he said he really could sing the role for you. And he came along and sang, and that was in Miami, and then we took him on our tour to Australia in 1965, and he was sort of the backbone tenor of that season.
Good, because for many years your partnership with Pavarotti on stage and in the recording studio was the talk of the opera world. What was exciting for you about that partnership?
Well, I mean, our voices did blend very well, and it was wonderful to be able to do these works and to have a singer who also could cope with them. But I mean, I did sing with other tenors, plenty of them, and they also could sing the music, because Pavarotti couldn't have done all of them. He was busy himself having his own career.
Is the opera world, as many people think, competitive and gossipy? I mean, that's the reputation.
Of course it is. Yeah. Is not any world that way? No, it is. But I mean, I've always admired all my other colleagues, and I think I've received great admiration. And let's say, respect from them. And one does respect them because, I mean, they're doing a job and they're doing it well.
But you never found that competitive, gossipy side to the opera world difficult to cope with?
Not really. I mean, one did one's work and went home. One didn't stick around gossiping.
Was it hard work? I mean, is it hard work being an opera?
Was it hard work? Of course it was hard work. Very hard work. And to sustain, to maintain the fact that someone's dubbed you La Stupenda, and to maintain that for another, I forget how many years it was, 60, 70, 80, 90, well, for about another 30-odd years.
How many hours a day did you have to practice?
Not as much as people might think. A lot can be done mentally.
Is that right?
Oh yes, I used to sit. I have a lovely chaise longue in my sort of annex to my bedroom, and I used to sit there and have the blind up and look out at the lovely scenery and study my score sitting there.
And so how much actual practice then?
In rehearsal for an opera, you do 6 hours a day in rehearsal on the whole. But I mean, you're not singing all the time. There are, 5 other people in the opera who have to do their scenes, plus the chorus. So you're there, but you're not having to sing all of those 6 hours. I think to actually work in the house, probably Richard and I used to do about an hour and a half and have a break, maybe do another half hour, have lunch, and then do maybe an hour after lunch, or otherwise not, and I would just study the words.
And so that's enough to maintain your voice in between operas?
Of course it's enough to maintain if you're using the right technique. My dear, technique is the basis of every pursuit. If you're a sportsman or you're a singer or you're a swimmer, well, that comes under sport. But you have to develop a basic technique that you know what you're doing at any given time.
Monica Attard here, and you're listening to an interview I recorded with Dame Joan Sutherland back in 2005. Now, Dame Joan, why is it that you refuse to sing in public anymore?
For goodness sake, dear, I'm 78. I don't want to get up and sing with what I might have what I might have called a voice now. Gracious me, I retired and that was it.
So does your voice age? I mean, is that the way it works?
You don't only just use your voice; you use support from the lungs and diaphragm, and everything gets old, whether you like it or not.
Yes.
You don't only have heart problems or any sort of digestive problems or anything like that. I mean, the body gradually disintegrates, whether you like it or not. And I was not having the response with my organs, viz. Lungs, heart, etc. I had a slight heart problem anyway. But it was time to stop. I'd been there for over 40 years.
Yes. And do you sing at private functions now?
No.
Never?
No way. No.
Do you still hum around the house? Because
that I do, probably as a baritone. I don't sing in the very high register anymore, that's for sure.
What do you find yourself humming?
Probably a baritone aria or maybe even part of a concerto. I don't know. I mean, it just whatever comes to mind, and usually something banal. I mean, might be sort of a funny pop song or anything, or an old variety song that my uncle taught me. It's just whatever comes into your head.
Is there anything that you could hum for us now? The audience would be just thrilled.
Definitely not. That is a closed book.
Now, Dame Joan, you performed 265 times at the Sydney Opera House in 23 roles over 4 decades. Now, that's an awful lot to leave behind.
Goodness me.
Do you miss the glitz and the glamour of it?
I can't say I don't miss it. But I mean, I had so much of the glitz and the glamour. What I miss is when I see dreadful productions on the stage that have been modernised and brought up to so-called up-to-date. Things that should be period pieces, and they do them with stark sets and modernised and bring in all sorts of actions that have nothing to do with the opera at all. That I dislike immensely. Hence, I don't go to the opera that often.
What do you make of the Baz Luhrmann operas? Have you seen any of those?
Yes, I have. I think the Bohème was quite charming, but it wasn't something that should be every Bohème in the future. Or worse, should I say. Some of the things have been terrible that they've put on the stage.
Do you believe that young opera singers and their teachers listen to what you've got to say? Are they interested in what you've got to say?
They appear to be, but whether they think any more about it once they've left my side, I can't imagine. I mean, I don't like the sort of term of master classes, for instance, because if you give master classes, you have a pupil or a a budding singer for, say, 40 minutes or if you're lucky, an hour. But after they've left the studio or the hall, wherever you're doing this, do they remember what you told them, or do they put it into practice? Or can they put it into practice? You can't just tell somebody, you should do this, and they go away and they know how to do it. That's not so. You have to be with them longer, many, many times.
Are there any Australian singers at the moment, currently, that you like, that you think have enormous potential or are already fantastic?
Well, there are Australian singers who have both potential and who are already singing. For one is Deborah Riedel, for another is Fiona Janes, another is Bernadette Cullen. These are all, they're not just out of conservatorium. They've been having careers for some time, both abroad and in Australia. But they are very fine voices, and there have been so many fine voices. I mean, somebody who used to sing with Richard and I so much was Clifford Grant, who was very fine bass. And we had sort of Anson Austin, who was an incredible standby for the opera. He was very, very strong, and he had a very fine tenor voice. Now, of course, he's retired too. We're all all my generation, and even one after me, are beginning to retire from the opera stage. And that is sad, because they did have very good training and very good basic technique.
Now, Dame Joan, you know how hard it is to make it overseas from the isolation of a country like Australia. Do you think that in your case it was luck or skill that got you where you ended up?
Oh, a lot of both. I didn't quite know what to do. I had some references, especially from Eugene Goossens, and I went once to Covent Garden, and then the other one I went to Clive Carey, who was an old teacher in England and was head of the opera school of the Royal College of Music, and I went and sang for him, and he said, "Well, my dear, I think you should come to the opera school for a year." And I said, "Well, you know, I've never been to a conservatorium. I have no degrees or anything." He said, "That's all right. We can get around that. You come and work with us for a year, and then we'll see what happens." So I auditioned for Covent Garden, and I worked for the opera school. And at the end of the current year with the opera school, people from Covent Garden came and heard me in singing a role that I never sang again, I might add. And the next morning I had a phone call and said, "My dear, we heard you in the performance, and we think we'd like to offer you a contract. Please come and see me at 10 o'clock, blah, blah, blah." And I ended up with a contract for Covent Garden after 1 year. Mm-hmm. I was earning, what was I earning? £10 a week. And my my work in the company, which was invaluable.
So do you see the Sydney Opera House or the Royal Opera House in London as your spiritual home?
Spiritual home once I came back, to a certain extent. My real home was Covent Garden. That's where I sort of polished my trade, as 'twere.
You've mentioned Richard, your husband, Richard Bonny, to whom you've been married for many, many years. Would you say that 50 years?
Yes, dear.
Congratulations. That is quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. Yeah, we think so too.
Would you say the two of you are still an invincible team?
Well, I don't have to do that much anymore. He's the one that does the work these days. He's off to Buenos Aires in a couple of weeks to do an opera he's never done before, nor has been performed in Buenos Aires before. He's doing I Lombardi, and at the moment he's studying like mad. I'm just sort of sitting around doing interviews or whatever.
But presumably supporting him along his way as well.
Doing what? Making his breakfast in the morning.
Well, that's an important task. Now, of course, some people say that he made you and others say you made him. I mean, how do you see it, or is it not important? Is it not important?
It's a partnership and entirely unimportant. Really, we worked together, and it has been a great, wonderful career. I don't really know if any other singer has had the support from a husband, or I can't believe it. I mean, someone as close to them as a husband. Mm. We were able to work at any time of day. We as we were living together, we could work or not work as we felt fit. You know, we sort of timed our rehearsals according to what sort of energy we had at any given time, and we never overstepped the mark of working too hard in any one day or whatever. It was something that gelled fantastically, really fantastically. And as I say, he knew a very vast repertoire of things that he thought might suit me. He even bought scores, sometimes full scores of operas at Sotheby's or something, because he thought, that is a fantastic. He'd look at the score and think, this is fantastic. He'd have seen a piano score and he'd think, this is great. And Esclarmonde came about like that.
Now, Dame Joan, you're well known for your monarchist views. Are you still a staunch monarchist?
How could I have something that's called the Order of Merit and something that's the Dame of the British Empire if I were not a monarchist? I'm certainly a monarchist. I think that, Australia as we know it today wouldn't have existed without those people going out in the ships like Governor Phillip and Governor Macquarie and all of them, for goodness sake. They did such wonders for the colony. Set aside, for instance, the botanical gardens and the for the use of the people, and those things have stayed. Those were terribly hard times for those early Brits who tried to colonise Australia.
But do you remain horrified at the thought of Australia without the Queen?
I'm somewhat horrified because I don't think the young people today even know what history is. Some of them don't even study history at school anymore, or geography, and they don't know where one place is from another.
Do you still think that all Republicans should be banished to Fort Denison?
That was a spur-of-the-moment answer to a battery of news people.
Well, another spur-of-the-moment comment that I might remind you about, which, of course, you were heavily criticised for back in 1994 when you bemoaned the loss of your British passport and what you describe as the ludicrous
situation. For heaven's sake, does that have to be dragged up every time?
Does it annoy you to have that dragged up?
Well, I shouldn't have said what I did. I was not thinking very well, was I?
Do you regret those comments?
I regret doing them in public. It just was so silly to think that because I already had a passport, it might have been going to expire, but to be asked to bring my driver's licence to say who I was, I had, or a credit card.
But I think at the time what people were upset about was the comment
I mentioned that the lady that asked for it was Chinese.
Yes.
She was, and I can't help that, and neither can she. And we have wonderful Chinese population in Australia and have had for years. But I don't see the point of my having to walk back to my apartment from the post office and bring another form of identification.
Dame Joan, what do you make of Denmark's Crown Princess Mary?
Oh, I think it's wonderful. I think it's absolutely fantastic. She seems to be a lovely lady, and it's a great thing to have happened.
Have you met her?
No.
Would you like to meet her?
Well, I don't know that it's very likely that I shall, but I certainly wouldn't mind meeting her.
Would you sing for her if she asked you to?
For anybody. I wouldn't sing for the Queen, dear. They wouldn't be so rude, actually, when they see that I'm 78 and have been retired for all those years.
Oh, I guess people just miss you so much.
Well, there's plenty of records, dear. I was very fortunate in making quite a lot, and they've been reissued and reissued and reissued again for our 50th wedding anniversary.
Yes, but I guess nothing like listening to La Stupenda live.
She couldn't do it now, dear, so she's not going to open her mouth as far as singing is concerned. In fact, I've opened my mouth too much already.
Dame Joan, I thank you very, very much for this interview and for your time.
Dear. Well, I really sort of feel for my colleagues, and I wish them all well.
Dame Joan Sutherland, 1926 to 2010, the most acclaimed soprano of the 20th century. And that's Sunday Profile for this week. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you again next week. Coming up on ABC Local Radio, Speaking Out.